In order to know if something is true, it must be proven scientifically. That's the statement that we're going to be looking at on today's episode of The Garrison.
We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming, trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to The Garrison.
Welcome back to another episode of The Garrison. Today we're going to be talking about, can science prove everything? Or specifically the statement, in order to know if something is true, it must be proven scientifically. Now, many people assume that this is true, as science is deemed as the authority on truth. People think that if you can't touch, hear, feel, taste, or smell it, it can't be proven right or wrong or true and false. But let's step back and examine if this is a good way of looking at reality. So I'm going to repeat that statement. In order to know if something is true, it must be proven scientifically. Well, can that statement be proven scientifically? Of course not. Now, we can't make up a hypothesis and conduct an experiment and then draw conclusions based on the results that we find. Not everything is able to be proven with science. Science, like most things, it has its limitations. So today I want to look at a few other ways of finding out truth. Ways that we can examine whether things are right and wrong, true or false, outside of science. Now, science, don't get me wrong, it's a very useful tool and it absolutely can be used to help us discover what is true and what is false. But there are other ways as well, and if we limit it just to science, we will run into some problems. So, first of all, let's look at reason. Science is limited to telling us things about the physical world, and that's about it. We need other ways of finding things out, and reason is one way. For example, I know that 1 + 1 = 2, but I didn't find that out with the science or the scientific method. I also know that there are no such things as square circles. Now, science doesn't prove that. Reason does. I know that a square can't be circular, or else it would cease to be a square. I know a circle can't be spherical, I don't know if that's a word, but or else it would cease to be a circle. So reason is one way we can know whether things are true or false. Another way that we can measure right or wrong or true and false is through testimony. We can know things are true or false by testimony, and testimony can tell us things and give us information just like science can. Whenever someone is on trial for murder, eyewitnesses to the event of the murder will give their testimony to help us understand what actually happened. Now, testimony, just like science, has its limitations. And one of these limitations is that it depends on the reliability of the person giving the testimony to see whether these things are really true or false. Another way that we can know and we can find out right and wrong is through introspection. Now, I didn't know what introspection was before preparing this talk, but introspection is defined as the examination or observation of one's own mental and emotional processes. And it's probably something that we do every day without understanding what the word means, or if you're in my situation anyway. If I ask the question, how am I feeling today? I don't need to set up a hypothesis and get results before I can draw a conclusion. Instead, through introspection, I can see if I'm feeling happy, sad, excited, angry, or whatever other emotion I might be feeling. And so that's introspection. We've got reason, testimony, and introspection. And another way is through looking at the objective standard of morality. And this is something that science can't give us answers for. The topic of morality brings a whole lot of questions that science can't answer. For example, is murder wrong? Well, we can't conduct a hypothesis and run through the scientific method to see so. How should people be treated? Is abortion wrong? How should I raise my children? These are all questions that can't be answered by science. And so science, it doesn't help us in this arena. It only helps us when we're really talking about the natural world. Instead, we must appeal to other ways of finding out right and wrong, such as I mentioned before, looking at the objective standard that's given to us by God If you don't believe in that objective standard, then there's no objective answers and everything's meaningless. But let's not go down that path today. I mean, if you are interested in that, feel free to have a look at episode 7, where we do talk about objective morality. But what I want to do now is look at the deductive versus inductive arguments. Now, what's the difference between these two, and what one does science use, and therefore is it reliable to just use science to find out whether everything is true? Okay, so first of all, deductive reasoning versus inductive reasoning. Now, when we're trying to figure out whether an argument is deductive or inductive, we must ask the question, is this argument trying to make the conclusion guaranteed, or is it trying to make the conclusion probable? Because with deductive reasoning, it's where you have normally a few premises, maybe let's say 2 premises, and if both of these premises are true, then therefore the conclusion is absolutely, certainly true, without a doubt. However, with inductive reasoning, if both the premises are true, then it will not make the conclusion absolutely certain, but rather just probable. Okay, now science uses the inductive method. We get a hypothesis and then evidence that either supports or opposes our hypothesis can help us figure out our conclusion. And our conclusion may be very probable, but as we are using the inductive method, we cannot be absolutely certain. Now, to help you understand, or at least this helped me understand, was to look at a few examples of the different types of reasoning. So here is a deductive argument to help you understand what it is. Premise 1, all dolphins are mammals. Premise 2, all mammals have kidneys. Now, assuming that both of those premises are true, then the conclusion is absolutely certain, and the conclusion is all dolphins therefore must have kidneys. I'll repeat that. All dolphins are mammals. Premise 2, all mammals have kidneys. And so our conclusion, all dolphins have kidneys. You see, we've got 2 premises which, assuming they are true, makes our conclusion true. And that's a conclusion which is certainly true. There's not a probable. It's not all dolphins probably have kidneys. It's no, all dolphins do have kidneys, right? So that's a deductive argument. But a inductive argument goes like this. We may have our premise. Let's say I live in the hill, and there's a lot of nice bush to go and walk around. And let's say that I said, I've never spotted a lion up in the bush on our hill. Therefore, if I go for a walk on the hill, I will not see a lion. Now, this is inductive reasoning, okay? Now, because based on my observations and my experiences, the fact that I've never seen a lion, and I don't believe anyone has ever seen a lion on our hill, therefore, there will not be a lion on the hill. But can we be absolutely certain of that? What if between the time of my last observation of the hill and the walk I'm about to embark on, a lion has been placed there by someone? So we cannot be absolutely certain. Or another example of inductive reasoning is this. Let's say the lion is Ben's favorite animal. Ben really loves lions, okay? That's premise 1. Number 2, Ben really enjoys wildlife photography. So number 3, Ben is probably going to enjoy this picture of a lion that I show him, okay? So I'll repeat that again. Premise 1, Ben loves lions. That's his favorite animal. Number 2, Ben really enjoys wildlife photography. So number 3, my conclusion is probable. Ben will probably enjoy a picture that I give him of a lion, because both of those 2 premises point to the fact that the conclusion is probable. But we cannot be absolutely certain, because maybe Ben has changed his mind. Maybe he's not feeling really well, or maybe there's something about that picture that just doesn't sit right with him. And so we cannot be absolutely certain. And so if we assume that the premises of the argument are true, with deductive reasoning, it will make our argument valid. It's a valid argument if the premises are true, but with inductive reasoning, it only makes it strong. It's a strong argument if the premises are true, but if we find out that these premises are actually true, not just assume, but we actually look into them and conclude that they are true, then the argument for deductive reasoning will become sound. It's a sound argument. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be certainly true, and it's a sound argument. But with inductive reasoning, if the premises are true, and we look into this, then the conclusion or the overall argument must be cogent. And the opposite of a cogent argument would be a not cogent argument, or the opposite of a sound argument would be an unsound argument if these premises weren't actually true. Now, hopefully I haven't made that too confusing. It did take me a while to get my head around, but these are the two types of reasoning that we can use. Now, why is this important? Well, when we're talking about science, and can science prove everything, or is the only way to know what is right or wrong or true and false using science, we have to consider that it uses inductive reasoning, okay? Now, what does science specifically do? How does it measure what is right and wrong, or how does it form a strong inductive argument? Well, here's an example of a scientific method. First, we make an observation. Now, I got the scientific method off WebMD, world's most trusted website. So first we have observe, or the observation. And so if I made the observation that a toaster is not toasting bread, then I'm going to make a hypothesis next. That's the second step. So my hypothesis is that the power outlet for the toaster is not working. Then I will make a prediction. That's the third step. Now my prediction is that if we change the power outlet, that will fix the problem. And so after my prediction, we will run a test. And in the test, I'm going to change the power outlet to see if that fixes the problem. Now, if the toaster is fixed, can we be 100% sure that the problem was that the power outlet wasn't working? We can be pretty sure, because the fact that we changed the power outlet fixed the problem. We can be pretty sure it was that. But perhaps by moving the toaster to the new outlet, something in the machine got shaken back into the right position, so it started working again. Or maybe before the experiment, all the power outlets in the room were out. They weren't working. But sometime between unplugging it from the old one and putting it into the new one, all the power outlets, they started working again. Maybe the overall electricity of the house was turned off, but then it was turned on in between or in the middle of the experiments. You see, I'm just providing a few ways in which we could explain it outside of our prediction. But the power was gone, and while you were moving the toaster back, the power was fixed. These are a few ways that we can maybe explain it. So we cannot be absolutely certain that our prediction or our conclusion is right. Now, of course, this is why scientists try to conduct experiments in a controlled environment where these things aren't going to be impacting the experiment. And this is why they repeat experiments as well, to check and ensure other variables like the main power supply remain in check. But the point is, we can never be 100% sure that the hypothesis is correct. We can get close to certainty, but never fully there. To know something for certain, we must use the deductive method. There must be a valid argument set forward of which the premises are true. Not only can science not prove anything for absolute certainty, but it also can't disprove anything. I found this quite surprising when I first heard it, but let's take leprechauns, okay? Can science disprove them using the scientific method? Let's make a hypothesis. Leprechauns don't exist. That's our hypothesis. Now, what do we do scientifically? Can we put something in a test tube or boil it in a Bunsen burner or measure it? This is where science also has its limitations. It cannot disprove anything. Now, we might make an argument and say, well, no one's ever seen a leprechaun, therefore it's probable that leprechauns don't exist. But we cannot be absolutely certain. And science, it cannot disprove anything. It can't disprove unicorns. I thought that was quite surprising, but when you look at it, it actually makes sense. Scientists might be able to say that in years for looking for unicorns, they haven't found any. Therefore, it's improbable that unicorns exist, but they cannot absolutely disprove them. In order to disprove something, we must use the deductive method. We must show that there is something contradictory about the concept itself. We must use logic and reason. And going back to that example that I used earlier, if I made the claim that square circles don't exist, how could you disprove that? Well, you could point me to the law of non-contradiction, which states contradictory propositions cannot be both true in the same sense at the same time. Therefore, square circles don't exist. So if I'm proposing that a shape is both circular and spherical, again, I'm using that word, which I may have made up, the law of non-contradiction shows that the statement is wrong because both propositions can't be true at the same time. So what? Why am I talking about this on a Christian podcast? What implications does it have for us? So from what we have looked at so far, we know a few things. One is that the statement, in order to know if something is true, it must be proven scientifically, is false. We also know that science is not the only way to know stuff. It's not the only way to figure out what is true and false. We also know that science cannot disprove anything. So if someone tries to use science to disprove God, they are making a mistake. Science used properly is a great tool that can help us learn many things, and if it's used properly, it will support the Christian worldview. But we must use other ways of finding out things about the universe, like logic and reason, and testimony, and introspection. And so, people who claim that science is the only way to know things are very much mistaken. If you're a Christian and you've had people say, you can only prove God is true by using science, and yes, we can use science to provide evidence that God is real, but there are other ways as well. People who hold on to science as this great authority on every matter need to realize that there are other ways of finding out what is true. And I'm going to read from an article that I found on standtoreason.org, which is a great website with many great articles. And it says here, for example, reason helps us assemble logical arguments for God's existence or evidence for the resurrection. Science can tell us about an expanding universe or help us understand the information code for DNA, both of which have theistic implications. Testimony can tell us about the first century, which can help us investigate historical facts about Jesus and the early church. And when we use all of these things, that's the end of the quote, when we use all of these things together, we can find out a whole lot more about the universe that we would have had we only used science. So the conclusion of this podcast episode is that we must be using different ways of finding out what is true, including science, but not just science itself. So if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to share it with people or leave a rating on wherever you're listening to it. Thank you for joining me today. We'll see you on the next episode of The Garrison.